Now to the UK, where the government and education unions have agreed to intensive talks on teachers' pay, conditions and workload reduction, which have sparked a series of strikes by teachers in recent months. The news came after a breakthrough in the National Health Service dispute on Thursday, with leaders of nurses, ambulance crews and other health workers agreeing to suspend further industrial action while ballots are held on a new pay offer. Britain has been hit by a wave of industrial action as workers urge the government for more help in dealing with the cost of living. Well, for more on this, we can cross live to London and speak to Arise correspondent Lape Olarinoye. Hey, Lape, welcome to the program. Now, this year has seen a slew of strikes resume across public sector workers in the UK. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's been going on?
Well, it began of last year when the cost of living crisis really began to affect thousands of people across this country. And we saw those strikes continue to increase from most of the public sector, including ambulance workers, nurses, teachers, as well as tube workers as well, and transport workers. Now, early this year, of course, it has resumed with only a couple of days ago, we saw the biggest coordination of strikes since the ones that ended last year. And they're all clamoring for one thing, and that is to increase their wages to align with inflation, as well as increasing working conditions and improving working conditions as well. And this is as a result of a number of factors, like the war in Ukraine breaking out, as well as the economic problems that this country is facing, that people seem to just cannot take it anymore. For that reason, we've seen these strikes from a variety of industries, and most recently from junior doctors as well.
Well, thank you, Lape. Now, how has the government responded so far?
Well, ironically, it was released on Wednesday, and it didn't actually include anything to do with increasing people's wages. Instead, it focused on the energy support for households, as well as childcare costs for many parents around the country. Now, that's been very interesting because the fact that the government did not include a mention of wage increases in the budget has put more pressure on the government to act. And just today, a number of hours ago, the government has agreed to continue talks with the NHS and meet them at halfway. But for some workers in the NHS, that simply is not enough. Many of them say they've been having a pay cut for the last 10 years, including teachers who only last year were given an increase of 5%, but that's not what they're asking for. Similarly, the junior doctors are asking for a 35% increase in their wages, which the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, is saying that that's simply unaffordable. So at the moment, the government is really in between a rock and a hard place, because what these public sector workers are clamoring for is to have their wages in line with inflation. But to do that all at once, for everybody to be satisfied, the government can't make those choices, especially because of the impact that will have on the economy, an economy that's already struggling.
Absolutely. Now, will this satisfy the unions? Is it enough?
A very interesting question you asked. I mean, the unions have been a huge factor in coordinating these strikes. They are fighting for those members who have voted to go on strike. Now, this might not be enough for the unions because it doesn't necessarily satisfy their members. And as you can imagine, their members are their priority. However, some unions in other parts of the United Kingdom, like in Scotland, have met with the devolved governments in Scotland and agreed to some sort of a wage increase. For example, teachers and nurses in Scotland haven't actually gone ahead with their strikes because the unions have managed to agree with those governments. Here in England, the picture is quite different. And for now, there is a sense that that might not be enough for those members that work in the public sector in the unions in England.
Lape, I'm just wondering how this might, affect, if it's having any effect whatsoever regarding immigration when it comes to getting people in this profession to the UK.
Well, as you can imagine, there has been an increase in the amount of migrant workers that have come specifically to the NHS, from nurses, doctors from Asia and Africa, Nigeria being one of those as well. Now, there has been a bit of a pushback from the NHS stating that the government doesn't want to increase the wages of the citizens here, but instead want to implore cheaper wages from abroad, cheaper labour, that is, from abroad. There has been a little bit of a pushback. Whether or not this will encourage the government to continue to open their doors to migrant workers, it's too early to say, particularly because they're two different issues. Migrant workers that come into this country will still feel the cost of living crisis, the impact of it. They still have to pay bills, they still have to get to work, they still have to be able to make ends meet. And so for that reason, migrant workers and kind of native workers here are all still in the same boat when it comes to wages. It's just that, of course, employing migrant workers means that the NHS can meet the demand, but actually the working conditions remain the same, and also the NHS as a whole needs a lot of funding in terms of its infrastructure.
Right, now with regards to Rishi Sunak and the Tories, it's obviously been an uphill battle. Are they winning any more love, or is it going to be a fight to the very next election for them?
Well, that's a really nice question that you've segued in there, because at the moment, the general consensus across the country is that as a result of the pandemic and the war in Ukraine and the soaring energy costs and overall the cost of living crisis has not made the Tory government very popular across the country. Having said that, in the last couple of weeks, the Tory government has released a lot of bills and policies that could be seen as voter-friendly, particularly on immigration. I mean, Cynthia just mentioned that the immigration, particularly those coming through those illegal routes on those small boats that we've seen on pictures, on newspaper headlines and so on, have now been banned. And that is a really important issue for many voters in this country, many of whom believe that those are part of the pressures that are on the infrastructure of this country. So I think the Tory government is hoping that that would appease some voters, as well as the newly announced budget that has offered help for more households in terms of their energy costs, as well as childcare costs. But overall, I mean, I've spoken to many people. The general consensus is that people just can't forget how the Tory government handled the pandemic, as well as the economy that is continuing to ail.
Thank you so much. Arise correspondent Lape Olarinoye, we appreciate your time as always. Thank you for joining us on Newsday.